Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Walks of Life podcast. I'm Russell, and today I'm joined by one of my favorite writers, one of my favorite people, Sara Campbell. How to describe Sara? Writer, coach, marketing executive, Zen Buddhist practitioner, and now lay teacher. We met through the writing collective called Foster, and meeting her in person during a Foster retreat was like the highlight of that experience. I view Sara as one of the very few people peering deep into the heart of modern society, facing it honestly, and reflecting back something worthy of our attention. Her Substack, Tiny Revolutions, is on my short list of must reads as soon as the new issue comes out. And to me, most importantly, she is a friend. With that, Sara, welcome.
Thank you, Russell, and thank you for such a kind and generous introduction. That's really lovely.
Let's get started. For the audience who doesn't know you as well as I do, tell us about yourself, your obsessions, your life, and your work.
Yeah, so I am a 48-year-old lady who lives in Los Angeles. I'm currently speaking to you from the Angel City Zen Center, which is where I live and practice. And I have been a writer since I was a kid. A lot of my life has been trying to figure out how to be able to have the time and space to write and pursue this. But I've had a bunch of different lives. I've lived a bunch of different lives at this point. I grew up mostly in the South, went to University of Georgia. I moved to New York. I eventually moved to LA, thinking I would be out there on a lark for all the kind of stuff you get up to when you're in your 20s. And then I never left. And it's taken me some really interesting places, from being a PR and marketing consultant for some really cool, interesting brands, to starting my own projects, to being part of a writing collective. And now my latest sort of incarnation is I'm learning how to teach Zen Buddhism in my role as a lay teacher. So what that means, I'm not going full monk. I haven't shaved my head, but I am trying to live a Zen life and help other people find this wonderful practice that's given me so much too.
There is so much to talk about, Sara, and I want to start with something you and I talk a lot about, we write a lot about, and then we've experienced, which is the subject of community in the modern age. So I think that the way we met through a writing group called Foster is about the best online community I've experienced. Talk with us about your sense of community in the modern world. How do you find it? Can there be a wholly fulfilling online community? Can a community be totally divorced from location, from place?
Such a great and rich question. I was thinking about how and why I've been so drawn to communities. And I think it starts with the fact that I was one of 9 children. And so my childhood was full of kids and full of people. And I was raised Catholic. And my family was very sports oriented. So we always played lots of sports. That wasn't huge, totally my thing, but I was always around in group containers, right? Even when we were just hanging out at home, there were usually a bunch of kids, our friends, that were hanging out. We were at that house in the neighborhood. And I just feel like I don't know who I am without people around me to reflect that back to me and to be part of it, or to be part of just being part of something. I think is so revealing in ways that, as introspective as I ever am and get, and I'm pretty introspective and I'm pretty happy spending long periods of time doing solo work. I really don't think that we can truly become ourselves without other people. My experience with communities has been really interesting, because I think, because I grew up in such a crowded place with other people, there was a part of me early on that was just like, no, I want to get out of this and find my own way. And I think that was because I was a little bit more kind of introspective and nerdy and studious than maybe some of my more just extroverted jockey siblings were. And so I moved to New
Mm,
York right out of college. I wanted to be a writer or work in media. And I found that experience really lonely. I had hard time breaking into the business. I ended up doing a lot of other things that were incredibly edifying. But when I think back on that period, I lived in New York from when I was like 24 to 28. I just am struck by the loneliness. And it was because I had a pretty good job and I had
mm,
friends, but it all felt like everything was in little boxes and containers. And so as I got older, I was like, no, I got to figure out how to make my world broader. And I don't think at that time I was even conscious of needing community. I don't even know if it was like those were terms that I used. And then I had this experience where I just was like done with New York for a lot of reasons, all the reasons that one might imagine a person gets done with New York. But I moved to LA and I had a bunch of friends there, and I had much more of a scene of people where I made a bunch of friends at work, and then I had friends outside of that, including my brother, who were just more of a gang who was around. So I got more of that web feeling of community and relationships. And then after that, I was just really conscious of that. And so I had to find different ways to meet that need. And I started becoming part of a writing group when I was like in my early 30s. And then eventually I found my way to meditation groups. And then eventually I found my way to the Zen Center. One of the key aspects of Zen practice is Sangha, is what it's called, but like the community of practitioners that you are sitting meditation alongside of, sitting in all of these different, the practice is very much about you don't do this alone. That's one of the key tenets of the whole tradition. So that's how I orient to community in general. I think the question about whether it's possible to have an online community, I think that's a really good, I don't, first of all, I don't think it's a coincidence that Foster came of age during the pandemic. And so this was a time when those of us who were in search of other people, we really only had one option, right? Or most of us, at least. And we found Foster. I was one of them. The founders were these two guys, Dave and Stu, who just wanted to assemble more people who are writing online, which I was doing, which you were doing at the time. And really what they started was just that connection point for lonely writers who were just wanting to seek out the company of others, but also the way that the organization evolved was, oh, it's not just that we want to give each other feedback on drafts, it's that we like having more interaction with each other, right? So the community gradually evolved into more interactive experiences that were facilitated and all that, and part of that was facilitating connections between each other and giving us all ways to be together. And that organization was venture backed because it had started as a software product. There was always a software product involved in it, but I think what was unique is that having that financial foundation without all the pressure to monetize gave us ways to evolve that felt really directed by the community and what the needs were, and also the interests of the people that were steering the ship. I started as just a practitioner in the community and then, or a member of the community, and then I eventually moved into a role where I was a paid employee. I don't know if I was ever a full employee. I think I was always a part timer. I was. But my point there being is that we were able to go where the community went and spend time really making super immersive things that were fulfilling for people that participated, right? If you wanted to engage, you could, and you could get, we were able to really create experiences that were transformative for people and that were really nourishing and that really allowed relationships to develop. And I do think that's somewhat unique. You and I met at a retreat, obviously. And I think there's something, I don't think there's anything that would replace actually sitting next to people, sitting down face to face with them and being able to make connection. And it's mysterious because it's like, we're writers, we're intellectual types. We're already able to have these conversations and be in conversation with each other with our actual work, but there's no substitute for being able to break bread and all the things that you do when you meet up in person. So my answer to this question that you pose, is it possible to do something online only? I do think yes, but I think the communities that really are able to do it for long periods over time and survive always have an IRL component. And maybe that's
mm,
like you meet up once a year, or there are gatherings a couple of times a year, and maybe you're able to make one every few years or so, something like that. But I think that stickiness does come from actual relationships, which is not to say that you can't have an online community. And I know a lot of people actually do it pretty successfully. But when I think about my own trajectory, yeah, there's no substitute from actually putting a name with a face at some point.
Hmm. I agree with that. Foster is amazing. It attracts wonderful people, but getting to meet everybody at the retreat brought everything to a different level. I've described it before as magic. It was qualitatively different after that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Let me continue this in a different vein. How do creatives exist and thrive in this modern world? You recently wrote that the path of a solopreneur is fraught, very difficult to make it absent a real, let's say, a passion for sales and a real deep and wide network where you're trying to work, and that you're looking to withdraw somewhat from that path. There are a lot of questions I have in here, but let me start out by I just love to hear you share your thoughts on that evolving ecosystem and the economics of creative work.
Yeah, God, that alone could be a whole conversation. And I'm thrilled to be asked this question because it's funny because my thoughts evolve, right? So at this point, I've now been blogging or doing some kind of creative endeavor online for 20 years, which is a really long time. And also, I've now had the opportunity to coach lots of writers and creatives. I actually just met with a prospective coaching client the other day who is a composer of music, and he's trying to figure out how to do this whole thing of balancing making his creative work with making a living. Obviously there are tons of us that are thinking about these things. I really got serious about trying to build my own business in 2019. I had been unceremoniously let go from a full-time job, and it was like one of these things where it was an interesting job, it was a cool job, but the pay was not great. And it was already one of those things where I was like, I'm not totally sold on this, but I'll do it. And then when I got let go, I was like, you know what? Fuck this. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to do my own thing. Right. And build it out so that I have an income stream that is not going to be dependent, or multiple income streams that are not dependent on one person deciding they don't want to work with me anymore, which had been the case of that last full-time job. And
Mm,
so from there, I started trying a bunch of things, right? Like I started as a content and communications consultant, which is something that I've done for many years. And then I have offered coaching. I have done ghostwriting. I've done a lot of community development and facilitation work, like I did with Foster and other things. Then I've had my newsletter, 10 Revolutions, which I've experimented with monetizing and turning on subscriptions and stuff. And I think you have to keep your why at the total center of it, right? It's if you are a person who's trying to build a business on your creative efforts, there is no business if you are not in a position to be able to dig deep and say, make meaningful work, right? So that's always at the heart of it. That alone is a lot, especially in our world where you got a bunch of different competing obligations, your family, your whatever else you're doing. Just being able to keep that sacred space where you're hearing yourself, and whatever ways you do that, whether that's meditation, prayer, walks, any number of ways you might do that, and then be able to make the work on top of it. We're already talking about substantial chunks of time. So I think this is tough. It's just finding the balance. And then after that, it's then you not only have to have the room for those two things, but then you got to figure out who wants them and would benefit from them and how to sell it from them. And it's just like when you put all these things together, it really is a pretty extraordinary combination of skills and individual that can do it all. And it's funny because I'll assume that a lot of people that listen to this are familiar with Substack, for example, or on some kind of social media where there are other creatives in the mix. We're in the midst of this epidemic of people who are like, I can teach you how to make a Substack that makes $10,000 a month or whatever it is, right? Here are all the hacks and tips and tricks. And they make it sound so easy. And if you just do these 5 things, like you will happen. And it's bullshit. It's just bullshit. Sometimes that will work. Sometimes people have a formula that if you really implement it, yeah, you can probably do something. But you always have to consider the source. It's like these are people who have not made a living from their creative work. They are now trying to help people who want to make a living from creative work monetize their creative work. So it's like they're not really themselves walking the walk in most cases. You do find some exceptions, but the vast majority are just other people who are taking advantage. That's so cynical. I don't want to say taking advantage, but let's just say offering stuff that they haven't really proven out. I think where I'm concerned is that I love writing the stuff that I write and doing the work that I do, whether that's writing or coaching or speaking or teaching, but I don't always have the gas left in the tank to be systematic about getting it out there. And what I've found over the last few years is that where I really struggle is to be consistent with that last part. And that's really where you get your sales, and that's really where you get your clients. And so it's just me trying to be real with myself. Is this a path worth exploring, knowing what I know now about who I am and my energy? The other thing I would say on my own behalf, and this is just with the work that I do, and I think this is highly dependent upon the kind of topics that you explore in your work or the kind of stuff that you are offering to people. I am always trying to do something really interesting and new that I would like. And what I find, and this will probably sound really self-aggrandizing, but I don't care. So I'll say it anyway, because I think there's an important lesson to be gained from this is that when you are a person who's working at the edges, not everybody understands that work or why it's necessary, and it might take them a few years to catch up. So now I've had multiple experiences where I'm offering something that I know to be of tremendous value, but in order to make people see that, I would have to do so much education that it's hard to get to that sale point. So, like, the thing that I ask myself now is, okay, what were the things you were doing a few years ago that now they're a little bit more out there and their time has come a little bit more and maybe other people might want them? And I include coaching and various types of, facilitation for lack of a better word in that bucket. But yeah, I think it's just even from what you could probably tell from just answer where I'm rambling a little bit is that there are just so many factors that underlie success. And the last thing I'll say, or I'll pause because I obviously would love to hear what you think, but if you are not financially stable or supported, or if you are worried about making your mortgage payment or your rent or whatever, you are not going to make your best creative work. And that is something to deal with, to contend with as well. Even if you are able to be a little bit riskier and make bigger swings, which I have certainly done, you start to slowly crush your ability to do that if you feel like you're too stressed to really have that expansive space that allows you to make your best work on behalf of others.
Your comment in that post really helped me hold up a mirror to my own efforts. And I think you're right. And it's like a lot of endeavors. Politics is a simple one where the best electioneer, the best campaigner may or may not be the best governor, the person who governs. Those are totally different skill sets. And it's pretty rare to find somebody who's good at both and who is good at both over a long period of time. History is littered with creatives who couldn't sell their own stuff. Nobody would know Van Gogh except for his brother. Van Gogh started to make a little bit of headway in the last couple of years of his life, but it was only after he died that his brother really made traction in the art world. And there's so many examples of great creative, terrible at sales, or likewise. I've been in sales for 20 years where people crush it in sales, but I'm not saying this in a negative sense. They have a skill set, but they're less interested in the creative side of life, and that's okay. It's very hard to find that alignment of skills that's going to make it a real success. And like you said, you see all those people. I think a lot of the people from Let Me Show You How to Succeed on LinkedIn have moved to Substack because
Mm.
I think LinkedIn is a little sort of saturated and Substack seems like this place where creatives have gone and everybody wants to make it and you can tell people how to make it. But it is rare to find someone teaching people how to succeed on those platforms and they are selling anything different than a class on how to succeed. Can you teach somebody who is a visual artist? Can you teach someone in real estate? How do you turn that kind of content into career success? It's a very different proposition, and I haven't seen that as much
Yeah.
or at all, or at all.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. You just reminded me of something. I've lost my train of thought. Yeah. And the other thing that occurs to me to connect these two questions that you've already asked, just to make it clear, it's funny that you bring up this post because I posted that this kind of thing where I'm like, I don't want to build by myself anymore. I'm just going to focus on my work with the Zen Center, which is something I am doing. Like we're building that out. And when I wrote that, I was like, I just don't want to build my coaching business solo because I miss having coworkers. And I think that's true. I absolutely miss having coworkers. And all the things I said about being in community are true in the work context too, in a professional context where it's good to have deadlines where you're accountable to other people. It's good to have feedback on what you're putting out there, all those things. I think I posted that a few weeks ago. When you post something like that, or when you say something that out loud, you get this, oh, thank God, I'm free, I'm relieved. And then what happens? Like gradually, all the reasons that led you to want to offer the things that you're offering pop back up. And you're like, but what about this idea? And what about that idea? And in my case, I've been approached by a couple people who are interested in working with me potentially as a coach. And so on this particular day, and this might be different tomorrow or next week, I'm like, okay, maybe I just need to do another round of experiments with putting these things out there where it's not so laborious or skin it in a different way. And so I say that just to make it clear that I continue to be a work in progress. I am not coming to any concrete conclusions. And I think that's just how we are. But the other thing I wanted to say is that I do think that part of where we're going for creatives is, or creatives who want to either get their work out there or offer some kind of service to make money or whatever. I think that your involvement in the communities that you're involving in is where our marketing efforts are going, right? Where it's like you showing up, you doing your unique Russell thing, your combination of things that only Russell really offers becomes a little bit more legible and in a natural way, right? Where it's, oh, I need to do XYZ, I got to call Russell. Or someone says, oh, you want XYZ to happen, you should talk to Sarah, and we can spread that around. And I think it's clear to everyone, like we hit some kind of like peak of being disconnected, atomized people who started realizing they needed community again. I feel like maybe we're over that hump, maybe we're not. But I think as we all sink back into this idea that we need to be part of larger systems, I'm hopeful, and this is where my optimism comes in, that I'm hopeful that we can have, it'll be somewhat easier for us to put what we have to offer out there, and it's seen because of our groups that we show up in, and less
Mm.
because we're doing a whole marketing campaign. Not that we're never going to get away from having to tell people what we do, but maybe it just makes a little bit more sense in those types of contexts.
Is that where creative work is going? Is the evolving ecosystem for creatives that you attach to a community or two, or the locality you're in, or your family's in, and that becomes the rooting for your work? And maybe it's online, but maybe it's a mix of online and in person. Maybe it's only in person. You and I have talked at some extent about just how creative work is changing. Organizations and publications like Creative Nonfiction, which had been around for 30 years, are no longer there as outlets. It's an evolving dynamic, and I think fraught, as we've been talking about. But I'm also curious about your thoughts. I'm happy ish with Substack. It's fine. Everybody looks and feels the same on it. Like their sort of template look and feel are very similar. But I've had this discussion with some of our friends, but I'm just curious, are we all headed to a place where we're just blasting each other more emails, like on our personal thoughts and analysis of things? And is that really the end all be all of the creative act?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I just am always looking through the lens of my own experiences and where I've gone and where I've gravitated. So I would just say that having now written online for more than 20 years, having been on Substack since 2018, and I only was there so early just because I had like an acquaintance online that mentioned it and it was easy to use and interesting. And it's become a much bigger ecosystem since then, obviously. I don't personally want to hear, there are some writers that I love and I do not fucking need to hear from them all the time. I just don't. That I think is probably more true than not. I think there are some exceptions to the rule, of course, but I think that's one thing that's a factor. I think the other thing is what types of stuff are you getting on there? There are some really successful big publications on Substack that are writing about trends or they're writing about a specific industry and whatever. In that situation, like, yes, timeliness and regularity makes sense. But when I think about like my favorite types of writing, which is I like creative nonfiction, I've been studying it for years. I like to hear thoughtful stuff. I like to be inside somebody else's mind. I don't really know that I need to hear from the same person all the time. And so that's where I feel like, I don't know, like your question about are we all going towards more coming organically out of our own scenes. Maybe I think that's possible. And I think that is, if you look at what somebody like Yancey Strickler is doing with Meta Label, I don't know if you know of him, but he started a Kickstarter many years ago. And for the last few years, he's been working on a project called Meta Label, where he basically is creating a system and a platform that allows people to come together and publish work together, which I think is just really interesting and cool. I suspect that Substack, it's like you can see where all you're getting all your stuff from Substack. And wouldn't I rather have some of this stuff bundled together, like in a magazine? And I'm not saying we're all going to go back to like print magazines that we get once a month, but it does seem like there's some level of, to your point, if we're all just like spammy emailing each other, what's even getting through? And is that good for anyone, any participant in the system? That's where I'm like, I don't know.
I don't have good answers. I don't know. I wonder
Tough.
about that. Yeah, I also wonder I definitely get some network effect from Substack, but I'm not growing so fast that if I left Substack, it would materially change my life. If I went back to Ghost, if I started on a different platform, would it materially change my life? Not really.
Yeah. What I'll say is that I had a period from I think 2020 to about 2022 where I was writing pretty much weekly yeah, pretty consistently. And that's when my audience really grew a lot. It's now I only write once a month and I don't think I grow much at all. If I do, it's like very small month over month, but I don't know, like this is just the world. We are all in an attention game. And I think the reality is like probably posting more is going to be better for your growth. But at some point, you just have to be like, what am I going after here? And I think for me, what I realized a couple years ago when I was writing that consistently and when I tried turning on paid subscribers, which I did get paid subscribers and it wasn't a ton. But once I saw what I was committing to and what that would mean for my creative work and the pressure I would put on it, especially for me, what I write, which is like very personal essays, I was like, this isn't going to work for me. Maybe again, if I was writing something more news oriented or about something else, but it just didn't make sense. And so it's like I really had to ask myself, like, why am I doing this? And I think for me, yes, inherently I like to express myself. I want other people to read it, but also it's about connection, right? And where I am settled now, and this might change, and I'm sure will change, writing monthly just to keep in contact, to say hi, to hear from people, to spark conversations, to be able to reflect and connect with new people. That sort of meets my needs for where that project is now. And so that's where I'm like, okay, that's fine for where I am.
Let me transition and ask you a few questions about your inspirations. Tell us about 3, 4 of your very favorite writers. Who is on your Mount Rushmore of writing?
Oh my God, my Mount Rushmore of writing. Oh my God, this is very top of mind because I just thought of this writer yesterday. I do a writing circle on Thursday mornings and it's through Foster. It's a group of people that come through, but I like it because every week we connect with each other before we sit down to write, but also it challenges me to come up with something to say or some kind of meditation to lead or something that helps us all get our heads around this process. And so I thought of this writer, Cheryl Strayed, who wrote like a blockbuster book called Wild that then got turned into a movie with Reese Witherspoon. And she's a great writer. I really like her. She used to write an anonymous literary advice column called Dear Sugar, which is where I got the name Tiny Revolutions for my newsletter, but told me so many things I needed to read When she was writing that column, I followed that pretty religiously. And she's a really brave writer who's able to really go deep. She writes about some pretty serious subjects, but she's also very funny and she's very incredibly perceptive. But I really love her as a writer. She wrote an essay called Write Like a Motherfucker that I return to all the time because it's motivational and it's funny and it really helps those of us who are incredibly self critical. I would put myself in that category, or at least that's some of the material that I work with personally. So I love Cheryl Strayed. I also absolutely love John Steinbeck. I remember loving The Grapes of Wrath even in high school, which is the book that standard high school syllabus book that people think of probably with, I read The Grapes of Wrath. I loved that then. I loved East of Eden when I read it probably 15, 20 years ago. I've liked a lot of his stuff. I just recently read Cannery Row, which I had never read, and absolutely loved that. And I was just like, this is a great human and a great writer. And those are, you can run across a lot of people who are one or the other, but finding them both in one person is incredible. I would say the same thing about Cheryl Strayed. Another writer that has had a tremendous impact on me is JD Salinger, another kind of high school syllabus writer, but Catcher in the Rye changed my life. Franny and Zoe was a huge book for me that I've read a million times. My dog is named Franny. I have read all of his work. I was disappointed after he died, they didn't put out more of it. I don't know if Steinbeck has this, they've not really put this together, but I feel like a lot of my favorite artists and writers and musicians are at the base, they've just suffered a tremendous broken heart. There's a real feeling of brokenness in them that they work with and is present in their work. And I relate a lot to that. And I've needed that. That's like food for me. And so a lot of my favorite writers tend to fall into that category of people who have gone to the depths and come back. And how do they work with that? So I will stop at three just because I feel like I could go on
Oh,
indefinitely.
I love it. What are you reading now, Sarah?
Oh my God. So this is funny. I was just saying the other day, I almost exclusively for fun read novels. I read other like spiritual texts and stuff like that for fun sometimes. I've read so much like self help, but when I'm just like going for pure pleasure, it's novels. And so I am reading currently a book called Utopia Avenue by David Mitchell. David Mitchell is an English writer. I have been on a tear of reading his books. He's probably most famous for Cloud Atlas, which also got made into a big blockbuster movie that I don't even remember if I saw, but that's a great book. But he does historical fiction with some mystical elements of it. And he can really take you to a world without it feeling really weird or you having to like put your mind around it. Like you just get transported then. So that this book that I'm reading right now is set in 60s swinging London with a group, a band that's coming together. And it's just so fun. And I just love escaping into that world.
Oh, very cool. I'll check that out. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What tell us about a book that everybody loves and you either can't stand it or you can't get into it.
So what's coming up for me is that writer John Krakauer. This someone just brought up Into the Wild the other day, and this one in Into Thin Air. I think he wrote them. He was like a guy who's a writer for Outside Magazine, great long form narrative nonfiction journalist writer guy. But that's the type of book that I would really love to get into, and I think is gonna is like that. I'm like, oh, great story. You're trying to climb Everest or whatever, and then I just can't make myself do it. The other person, and then just because I'm feeling salty today, is I can't stand Rick Rubin, and he's another one where I actually read the Creative Act or whatever the book that he wrote, and it's good. It's undeniably good. There's great ideas in there and great observations, but I find his whole persona really insufferable.
I'm going to agree with you on that. This economics blogger and podcaster, Tyler Cowen, who I have
Mm.
enormous respect for, he and Rick Rubin have become like DJ buddies. It's like funny to hear them talk about. But there is just something about Rick Rubin. One, okay, acknowledge the ideas came from him, but a co-author wrote the book. And there's just
Yeah.
something about that. Oh, it's a little bit like Profiles in Courage. And was it Ted Sorensen? And my name's not on the book. I didn't write it, but I don't know, man. I think you did. I don't think Kennedy wrote it, man. Sorry. Whereas Churchill wrote his books. Like you may or may not like Churchill, but he wrote his books. He did not have a ghostwriter. He didn't have a co-author. He wrote his books. And I think there's just something, maybe Rick Rubin isn't an amazing writer. Maybe it did turn out better having a ghostwriter. I think it would have been a more fascinating insight into Rick Rubin had he written every word himself.
That is a very insightful comment and reflection, and I totally agree. That hits the nail on the head of why I find him alienating is that he, for all his talk about creativity, it's like you write a book about creativity and being the expert on creativity, and you didn't write it yourself. And then you are working with people as a doula for their creativity, musicians, whatever. I get it. But yeah, he rubs me the wrong way.
And don't get me wrong, he is an undeniable genius in his lane. Like the work
Yeah.
he did resurrecting Johnny Cash's career at the end of Johnny's life and the Beastie Boys, and it goes on and on. Those were the touches of a savant. And I'm taking nothing away from that. And yet, as we've talked about, there's just something that's just not totally right there.
Amen.
All right, I want to transition and talk about personal questions. And I want to start with just, I'm curious, in your life, what are you most proud of? And it doesn't have to be an accomplishment or a job or a piece of writing. It could involve work, but not necessarily. Just what in your life are you most proud of?
Yeah. It's a really deep question. I think that I am most proud of, again, this may sound self-aggrandizing. I don't really mean it in I don't mean it in this way, but I really had to do a lot of work to uncover why I had such depressive and destructive thoughts about myself. It started very early. I basically had bouts of depression and stuff starting when I was very young. And I've really had to take the reins and go hard into why I was like this and how to escape it. And I think that explains everything about my career, including and up to now, where I
Hmm.
have landed in the vocation that I have with Zen teaching. But I think I inherited a lot of poor, for lack of a better terminology, poor emotional hygiene. And I think also there's biology at play and genetic components of all this stuff. But I think I inherited a lot of stuff. And then I had a lot of conditioning that was not conducive to living a healthy generative life. And I've had to
Mhm.
really get to the bottom of all that. In a lot of ways, it has been me focusing on myself, but I also feel like I'm breaking generational stuff here and
Mm,
doing stuff that my mom would have benefited from, her mom would have benefited from. A lot of the people
mm,
on my mom's side of the family, for sure. It seems a lot to say I'm broken a generational curse, but I think there are ways in which that is true. And that has been the
mm,
hardest and deepest work of my life. And now I'm entering
mm.
this phase where I'm trying to help other people do that too and share what's been meaningful and liberating for me. And yeah, it's been a journey.
I don't want to necessarily limit it to most important. But what's an insight from that process that you've taken away that you would want to share to others who are listening to this that
Mm,
might be
yeah.
feeling similar feelings?
The only way out is through. And you have to face it's like really truly taking a look at places you don't want to look at or that you would rather not or that you are afraid of. That's where your answers are. And it's Zen meditation. For example, the style of meditation is that you sit literally and you face a wall with your eyes open, right? So what happens when you do that is you are just sitting with whatever is present, and that's what your mind judges up. That's what your stuff you feel, stuff you hear, and really just radically accepting all of it is the practice. And a lot of that includes stuff that you don't like about your life, about who you are, about how you are, and seeing all these things and all these ways that are things that you really wish weren't the case. Over time, I think it's, you have to develop self-awareness to know what you're working with and where you are in order to be able, it's like almost, I've heard it said, like, it's only once you do that that you can change and make changes. But I think in my experience, I spent so long trying to change myself into something else or just not see, running from the darkness, running from it and being afraid of it, that it took me a long time to realize that is not the answer. It's not fun. It's hard work.
You have written and we've talked about, you've spoken beautifully and achingly about your mother's passing a couple of years ago. And then afterwards, you lived with your father for a while. What was all of that, and how has your relationship with him evolved since your mother passed away?
Yeah, I should say that I've always had a really good relationship with my dad. My mom was tough. I would say that understanding, working with that relationship and trying to understand it has been a lot of my work. And my dad, on the other hand, our relationship was always pretty good at a surface level and we could enjoy each other. And he's a total character. He's a grouchy old man kind of guy. He's about to turn 80. He's still very sharp. And he's always just been a type A, like driven kind of dude. But I'm like, all right, man, do your thing. I'm here to just help you where I can, which is not much. There's not much you can do. Like, he's going to do his thing. But I would say we're buddies. I think that, and we help each other out in ways that we help each other out. I think for him, a lot of it was just being seen. And I think this is with a lot of older people, that's what's hard, right? Like, the life moves on and people are interested in the kids. My family is full of kids and always has been. And that's how it is. That is how it should be, right? But I think that's also a really lonely place to be when you're getting older. And my mom was always my dad's cheerleader, companion, etc. And I know that was such a difficult transition. And they were together for 55 years. So I feel like I can't imagine it because have never been in any relationship approaching that length, but it must be like losing a limb or something. So I think we were able to keep each other company in that way. And I think with him, just me being able to relate to him, yes, in the way he's my dad, but also just as a buddy has been an interesting development where I think he feels pretty free to tell me stuff about his life that he probably wouldn't have before this
Mm.
experience, just as a,
Mm.
hey, we're both adults trying to navigate life. But yeah, it's weird. It's been a really pleasant surprise to be able to be buds with your parent. But your parent's never not your parent. So there's still attendant difficulties.
I want to get into your life as a practitioner of Zen Buddhism, specifically Soto Zen. Would you share with us your 2 minute spiritual autobiography? How did you get to Zen? How did you get to the Angel City Zen Center in Los Angeles?
Yeah. So I was raised Catholic. I was pretty religious as a kid. I remember really being interested in the teachings and taking it very seriously, which I've since discovered, which I thought everyone was, but then I discovered getting a little older, like a lot of people were not either really paying attention or that into it, but I always liked it. And then as I got a little older, I started to grow disenchanted with the church for a variety of reasons, a lot of which had to do with being a girl. I really felt keenly that it was unfair that I couldn't do a lot of things that my brothers could do and being involved in the church. Like, you couldn't be an altar server or stuff like that. And I think that growing up for me, I just started to be like, I don't know about this. And there were other reasons too, but I got a little older and was like, I don't feel like this is the thing. I had to go to church every Sunday when I was living at home. So after I graduated from high school, left the house, I was basically atheist or agnostic. I don't know if I would ever have called myself atheist, but certainly just living like an agnostic life where, doing a lot of reading and thinking about stuff, but never really identifying as spiritual. And then, like
Mm.
I said, I've had a lot of background or a lot of my story is that I dealt with pretty serious bouts of depression. And I eventually stumbled upon meditation as a modality was really helpful for me to do. And so I would go through periods where I was meditating a lot. I was finding it really helpful. And then I would fall out of practice. And then I would eventually be like, oh, no, I have to go back. And what I discovered gradually over years is that I was much more likely to stick to my practice if I meditated with a group. So then I sought out a group and I sat with a secular mindfulness group for a couple years here in LA and loved that. Then the teacher moved away and I had to find a new group. And LA is great for this. I did some spiritual tourism, went to a bunch of groups, checked them out, trying to figure out what felt right. And I didn't find anything. And then someone was like, oh, there's a Zen center right down the street. And I was like, really? And my impressions of Zen at that time were not great. It seemed really hardcore and strict and stern. And I was like, I don't know if I like that, but I was like, I'll go check it out. And then I walked in and learned to meditate in the Zen style. And I liked some of the people and the attitude of the center. And I was like, all right, I found my new group. And that was just close to 7 years ago. And I just have been sitting with them ever since.
What do most people misunderstand or maybe underappreciate about Zen?
Yeah, I think with Zen, I feel like most people don't really know anything about it at all. I was one of them, certainly, before I walked into the Zen Center. Zen's a word, it's in pop culture. It's cracked me up. The Vanity Fair cover story this month is Jennifer Aniston, and it's like the Zen of Jennifer Aniston. And it has nothing to do with Zen, right? Like Zen just means like chill and minimalistic and chill, basically. And that is like a very shorthand for what the aesthetic is, I think, of Zen. The other thing you might think of as a Japanese garden or like a monk or whatever. So I think number one, there's probably not much understanding at all of Zen. And why would there be really? But I think what Zen is at heart is teachings for helping you to see, to understand who you are and what you are. And the main practice through which we do that is meditation, but we do other things as well, chanting and rituals and this type of thing. But anyone can meditate, anyone can come practice with us. It is a religion, it is an ancient tradition. It goes back to the historical Buddha 2,500 years ago. But it's just a way of relating to yourself and getting to the heart of who you are. That's what the practice is. So it can be done by anyone.
How'd you become a more, let's say, serious practitioner? And then what drew you into becoming a lay Zen teacher? And what even is a lay Zen teacher? What does that mean? And what do you do?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I think this goes right back to your initial question, which is about community, right? So for me, I initially came into Zen practice just because I knew that meditation was good for me. So it was almost like I was going to go to the gym. I was going to come to the Zen center and sit my meditation. Like, that was my medicine. If you come to a Zen center, you might hear a teacher say this or something like it, which is that typically you'll go and there will be a period of meditation, 30 minutes or an hour, and then you might hear a Dharma talk. Meditation can be hard, is hard for a lot of people. And so this is how I thought coming in. It's like I do the meditation, it's hard, and then I get to hear the real teaching, which is the talk. But the reality is like the real teaching is the meditation. And the teacher, the teacher that I was originally studying with or learning from used to always say that the talk is the lollipop after the shot that you get at the doctor's office, right? So the meditation is what you're really here to do, and then the talk is helpful. But over time, like when I first came, I would sit through talks and I would be like, I don't understand what they're talking about. Or a lot of times I would get something, but I would be like, this is really mysterious. And then over time, the more I sat and the more I listened, the more the teaching started to sink in and make a little bit more sense to me. And I got really into that. I also found a great community of people. Zen practitioners tend to be pretty interesting people. They are people that are willing to sit for long periods in front of a wall and look at what's coming up, right? And again, includes a lot of different types of things. You typically find all types of people who are really intellectually curious and want to get to the heart of the matter, so to speak. So I think the community, yes, the practice of meditation, but then the community and just having routines and somewhere to go. And I think there's a lot to be said in just being in rooms with other people who are well intentioned and attuned to something bigger than themselves. And I think you can find that I think you can find that in any number of spiritual traditions, right? But it's Zen was the one that showed up for me that was down the street. And there's another sort of adage that you might hear, you might have heard if you've spent any time in these types of spaces, which is that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I really think that's what happened to me when I walked into Angel City Zen Center.
So why'd you decide to become a lay teacher, and what was that process
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. So basically, I became like a barnacle. I just kept showing up at the Zen Center and meditating. The Zen Center itself is a house where there are rooms for residents. There's a suite of rooms in the back, and the person was moving out in like 2020. So it was like early pandemic, and they were looking for a new resident. And at the time, I was living in like a one-bedroom apartment. And I'd already been a remote worker for a while at that point, and I was living alone at that time. I was like, if I live alone for a lengthy pandemic, I'm going to lose my mind. And I actually wasn't that serious about Zen practice at the time. The teacher was like, hey, we have a room. You'd be great. Would you be interested? And I originally was like, no, thank you. And then I thought more about it, and I was like, wait a minute. Yes. So I moved into the Zen Center and became a resident, which kind of accelerated my practice because guess what? There was nothing to do during the pandemic but go to the sits every day. So it was like between Angel City Zen Center and Foster, it was like those were my social outlets, and that was my practice. A lot of writing and a lot of meditating and doing the work that I did. But I stuck around. I did it. I found it really rewarding. I found the teachings really infuriating and fascinating and confounding and all those things. And I also just really liked, again, the community. A lot's been happening behind the scenes. We're a young center. And as my teacher that I've been working with kind of progressed and got various certifications, he got a graduate degree and then he was ordained and then he's been to do a couple of different monastic training periods. I got more serious and became more of a lay leader in Sangha, where just helped do various things, served on the board of directors, volunteered, all those things. And I think to answer your question about what a lay teacher is, that you do have a lot of this very same trading, right? Or in the teachings and Dharma and all that stuff. But the role that I feel in the Sangha is that I'm not a monastic, right? I'm not going and taking vows of renunciation. I'm very interested in the world and of ideas. I like to be out and do various profit making enterprises and all that stuff. And I don't think any of those things are necessarily like contradicted to Zen practice, but it does seem like I'm pretty well, just because of the way I stumbled upon Zen and my own path to it. I think this practice is good for anyone. I'm a huge Zen fangirl, but I think in a place, in a time in our world where there is a major war for attention, I don't think there's anything more beneficial we could be doing than to stay close to ourselves and the heart of who we are, to counteract some of those negative effects of just being constantly spoon fed whatever we're spoon fed. I think this is good for anyone that wants to do it. And I think my focus can be helping people who would welcome or appreciate that type of support, and that's the type of space that enables it. That kind of feels like where my skills naturally go, as opposed to someone like my teacher Dave, who's amazing and has those things in mind, obviously, but he's like a huge scholar and a big history nerd and incredibly deep into the history of the practice and all that, which feels a little different, right? That's a little bit, he's more monkish, I think, in that way.
Now that you're a teacher, I'm curious, what does a teacher owe her students, and what do your students owe you as a teacher?
I think a lot of it, one of the precepts that we chant is precepts are something similar to, they're like ethical guidelines, something similar to like commandments in Judeo-Christian world, but a little bit different. But one of them is, I vow not to spare the Dharma. And so I think a teacher is, you know, when you become a teacher, you are letting your life be, letting the teachings, let me think of how to phrase this, sharing the teachings with others, but sharing them in a way that it comes from your life experience, right? And so I think of my mandate as to embody the practice, obviously, but also share how it intersects with the teachings and really bring that alive for people. Because I think it's true with matters of religion or spirituality, there's often a feeling that we have, and this is something that I reacted really poorly to in Catholicism, especially where women were concerned, where you get into like kind of matters of shame about the body, but it's like you're never living up to it, right? But setting a high bar that you're aspiring to, but the shadow side of that is I'm never going to be perfect. I'm never going to whatever. I think with teaching, I want to show that we're human. We're human beings. And I don't think this is confined to Zen. I'm just saying this is how it's unfolded for me is what does it look like to live an honest human life? What does it look like to make these mistakes that we make? How are we introspective? How do we forgive ourselves and each other? How do we create pathways for each other to do this work too? And I think that's what a teacher owes their students, the members, practitioners, is like really bringing that and making that as alive as it is for an individual. I think that's what a teacher can help with. I think with any real truth that you stumble upon in your life, it's did you learn it or did it just ring a bell? Or did someone say it in a way that you were like, yes, that? And I think that part of it is just translating these old things into ways that feel modern and that people can understand, that feel contextually relevant. I think in terms of what students are their teachers, I don't know, that's a really great question. I think a lot of it is being honest with what you're going through and sharing your practice and not pulling punches. I think on both sides it's not pulling punches and being truthful about what our experience is, and I think that is helpful for the teacher as this vessel where these things pass through. And I think it's helpful from the practitioner side of how do they land? What resonates? What doesn't resonate? What feels like bullshit? I think the more honest we can be about how we're living and how all the contradictions and paradoxes, like the better.
What has Zen taught you about life or the world or human nature that I, for example, as a non Zen practitioner, don't grasp or don't understand or don't fully appreciate?
Honestly, I would not say, actually, here's exactly what it is that I'm not special. I think that's true. I don't think that there's anything that I would say that I have special knowledge of. What I have been trained now to do, and I'm still really, frankly, being trained on, is how to pass along these teachings and how to create safe spaces for you to engage with them. I think that we say a lot, you are, this is a famous line from Zen stories, but you are not it, in truth, it is you. So it's like we are here, we are individual sparks of whatever we are individual sparks are. You can call it what it is, you can call it whatever you want. And the human experience is universal, right? It's in every one of us. Can we see it? Can we work with it? Can we accept it? And so that's what my training is, to help me let it in and accept and go with it, but also help other people do that as well.
What can Zen teach the West about itself, meaning the West?
I think coming back to what I was talking about before, which is what it is, what it entails, which I think really is a willingness to accept this moment exactly as it is, right? So it's like our practice to do that primarily is meditation, zazen, or shikantaza is the Japanese word for it. But that as a practice is, again, not something that we are encouraged to do, right? Very often, which I think is really special and unique, or not unique, but worth doing, certainly something that is helpful. But if you just spend a few minutes every day sitting down and not not actively doing something, I think there's a lot you can get from that. And so Zen's really a practice that facilitates that experience in various
Mm,
ways.
I love that. And I loved, as I asked you that question, I thought back to one of your earlier answers about we're so bombarded by our phones. What a wonderful practice to be with yourself, to stay close to yourself. The Oracle of Delphi, know yourself. And literally from that, how much of Western history is getting away from that?
Totally. It's baffling. And here's the thing about me. I think I'm pretty perceptive and I think I'm pretty curious in my own right, but what I'm not is a scholar. Actually, a lot of my Zen training has taught me that I'm not a scholar. And I don't mean that to diss myself. It's an orientation that I don't fully have. I have interest in history, but I'm never going miles deep. I would say I'm more interested in relational experiences with other people.
Mm.
which again, this is fine. There are different ways to be in the world, and that's probably just what I'm more oriented toward. But I say that because I think that is something that Western culture, yeah, we're so young or action oriented or like how to do things, which again is not bad, but we need to balance that with
Mm.
being able to be with what is, to just cultivate awareness of our present moment. Because I don't know what your experiments or exploits in the world of AI are, but I see people getting further and further detached from themselves through the use of it. And again, it's like it's like without making an enemy of any of these types of pursuits, I think that you need that presence of mind to be able to skillfully work with them and not let that tail wag the dog. Really view whatever awareness practice you work on as fully necessary, especially where we are at this point in culture.
I've got a simple question. Despite my own reading, listening to a couple of Zen podcasts, I cannot for the life of me figure this out. Do Buddhists believe in God or multiple gods or none of the above?
This is where you're getting me at my baby Zen teacher stage. I think an advanced person would be more skillful at being like, where does this God you speak of? And ask you if you can locate it. Another answer might be that our matter of concern is that we're trying to sit with it, whatever is present right now. That's what a teacher is guiding you into, is always coming back to your experience. Another answer might be that there's a lot of stuff out there that we don't know about. I think when the effect of sitting with doing meditation or sitting with whatever is currently present is that you can start to realize that there's just a lot you don't know, and coming to accept that our conception of the universe leaves a lot to be desired. It's way bigger than my brain. I love that Shakespeare quote where he's, there's more in heaven and earth than your philosophers have dreamt of. I think of that a lot. And yeah, how's that for an answer?
I love it. That's great.
That's about what I can say.
All right, Sarah,
But
let
I will
me get you
also
out of
tell
here.
you that I say prayers at night. I
There you go.
meditate in the morning and I typically say prayers at night.
There you go. Interesting. Why does it seem like,
Which is not the Zen teacher answer, just for the record. That's just my personal answer.
but it is, you talked about how a big part of your role as a teacher is to channel your experience into teachings and be an example for others to help channel their experiences into their own teachings. And that's your experience.
That was my experience.
Why do you think the modern West seems to be having some kind of resurgence in spiritual longing? It has secular flavors. Some people might call it mindfulness, but even if we exclude that and go with pure spiritual religious, it seems like it's just much more in the public discourse than it was 15 years ago, for example. Why is that? And is that going to be a sustainable trend? Is that the new equilibrium in 50 years? Or is this a 5, 10 year aberration and the much longer trend of the Western movement into secularism going to be the prevailing trend?
Yeah, what an incredible thing to contemplate, honestly. Again, I typically view things through my own kind of lens, but I do feel like we just went through such a period of rationalism, and I certainly came of age with the what I now think is wildly naive and hubristic notion that we just had it all cataloged. Science had all the answers and everything was understood and there was an explanation for everything. And it's just like the whole cliche of the more you know, you don't, the wise man knows there's a lot he doesn't know. I think that's like some kind of bastardization of Socrates or Plato, maybe one of them. But point being, I think we got to a breaking point with that, where it was like, not only are we getting to a greater understanding, there's a lot that we really can't account for, and scientists will be the first people to tell you that. But also, I think it has to do with community structures. And like, there are a lot of religions that we have a huge distrust in institutions, and those include our religions. Obviously, the Catholic Church, which is the tradition I came from, a big example of massive breach of trust through scandals. And I think those types of scandals have had massive effects. But I think one of them is that we bring the whole conversation full circle, is like you don't have maybe a place where you're known, where your family is known, where you're held in a web of relationships. And I think there's two things. I think that if the human search for meaning is a tale as old as time, we're always going to do that, right? And searching for a greater understanding. But also, I think those community structures that we lost when we threw baby out with bathwater in a lot of those cases. And I think it's a confluence of those two factors, and probably a lot that aren't springing to mind or that are beyond my comprehension.
Couple last questions for you. One, I've been starting to ask folks this, and I'm fascinated with answers. But where do you find beauty in life?
Nature, honestly. I'm a person that walks. I typically find I'm a big, like you, Russell, I'm a big walker. I love it. I walk, usually I try to get my 10,000 steps, which for me is about 5 miles. And I rarely do that on a treadmill because I don't have one. But I think there's so much beauty out there and it's everywhere you look. And I always find something to appreciate when I'm out in the world.
Yeah, I'm very similar. Very similar. All right, let me get you out of here on this question. What's next for you as a lay teacher, as a Zen practitioner, work, life? Answer it however you want. What's next for Sara?
Like I said, I'm a baby teacher. So just trying to let be in this period, really be experiencing, putting all the reps in, working with students here at the Zen Center, keeping the doors open, doing all those administration things, and learning how to really run a community practice. I feel like that's, if I think about like myself in terms of a learning that's a trade sort of I'm learning, I'm like very much in the journeyman stage. So I think that, and as part of that, what I'm really excited about is getting really good at Dharma talks. So it's almost, I spent a lot of years practicing and studying the craft of creative nonfiction, took tons of writing workshops and wrote lots of essays and all that stuff. And so I'm applying that to getting good at working with the teachings and giving talks that, yeah, I want to get good. I want to be good.
What does that mean for you? What differentiates a good Dharma talk from an okay one from a not good one?
Yeah. I just gave one the other night that was, I don't know, it was okay. I think I did a competent professional job. It was taking on a very old sutta, which is a scripture in Buddhism, and try to bring that to life. But I missed a couple of key things that I think are always part of a good talk. So it's part of it is just like figuring out how to work with the ingredients and give them my own flavor.
Hmm.
And I think skillfully bring in the teachings, but my own experiences and my critical engagement with the teachings and all of that. But I think at the end of the day, does it feel helpful for someone? Does it strike a chord? Does it give them something to think about or bounce off of? And I think that's this, it's similar with writing. If someone engages with a piece of writing, there's lots of ways you can discuss, you can assess whether it's quote unquote good. But I think a lot of it ends up with, does it touch you? Does it connect? And so I really want to try lots of ways and explore getting good at connecting in that particular genre.
Well, Sara, this has been amazing. I've just loved every minute of this conversation. We could go on and on about community, about Zen, about your spiritual autobiography. This was fascinating. I just loved it. I really appreciate you joining me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Russell. And thank you so much for all the thoughtful questions and the opportunity to go off about them and for your friendship.
Sounds great, Sara. Have a great week. Talk to you later.
You too.